welcome to July's Learning Lunch. We were so excited to meet and chat with everybody that I forgot to press record at the beginning. So I'm recording just our introduction and then we will blend you right into our learning lunch. I want to introduce myself if you haven't met me. My name is Michelle Jones. I started my career as a pediatric nurse and loved it. I became more focused on wellness and mental health from navigating my own trauma healing journey. And I am now really passionate about bringing hope to others and helping them understand their bodies and their experiences so that they can move from survival to creating a life that resonates for them. I absolutely love my work as a trauma educator and coach. I grew up in Southern California and live now in Mesa with my husband and youngest daughter. I also have 2 adult kids at ASU, and I love this stage of mothering. You'll see that I'm co-hosting with Julie Gustafson. Julie is an intuitive and vibrant trauma integration practitioner and co-founder of Trauma Integration. Her experience as a community leader, speaker, and her own trauma healing journey have given her compassionate insight and the ability to truly see and understand her clients. She has a gift for cutting through the distractions and getting to the core of the issue, and she's passionate about helping people step out of survival mode and into joy. During the recording, you'll notice that I'm doing most of the talking. Julie had lost her voice, so you'll see that she'll pop in here and there, but I'm going to be leading the conversation today. But before we jump in, let me tell you a little bit about our purpose here as a Mindwell Collective. We came together as a way to bring wellness education and support from a variety of modalities. Mindwell stands for Mindful Wellness, and we are excited to have you on this journey with us. We are creating an ongoing opportunity for you to connect, feel supported, and understand healing and wellness on a deeper level. I think I speak for the entire group when I say that our favorite part is connecting with you. And we are so curious to experience the community we can build together. Now let's transition to getting ready for this learning lunch deep dive on understanding trauma.
Beautiful. Okay, so I just want to take a minute for all of us and just bring us all together. So we've all come from different tasks, conversations, responsibilities, commotion, maybe just the commotion of summer travels and all of those things that are going on. So I just want to take a moment to bring us together here to this moment. So I'm going to invite you to get comfortable as you can be, sitting in front of a screen, and close your eyes and just take a deep breath. Maybe the biggest breath you've taken all day. Just let that air fill in your lungs. And as you breathe out, know that you have permission to release the tension and stress that's in your body in this moment. I'm going to give you an invitation to set aside everything that you have going on just for an hour or however long you can be here with us to be present in this space. This time and space has been set aside for connection, compassion, acceptance, and support. And as we are in this connected space, I want to give you this opportunity to think about your intention for this hour. You have created time to show up and be here today. What are you hoping to get out of our time together today? How do you want to show up in this space? If you want, you can share in the chat. Or this can just be something that you make a little note of to kind of check back in with at the end of our time together. I'm going to share with you that my intention today is to show up with an open heart, to be here in this moment with you. And today, because I am leading our conversation, our deep dive, part of my intention is to be vulnerable and to share from my own experience with you. And as always, to create a space for you to share and to be heard. The benefit for the few of you that are here tuning in live, I know several people are in the middle of travels and are looking forward to the recording of this, that we are going to have an opportunity for you guys to ask questions and interface with us. And we'll have time to reflect and share that at the end as we go. So this is how I'm going to present today. Rather than doing just one big Q&A at the end, as I was preparing this, I was thinking, I think what we're going to do is I'm going to provide an opportunity for Q&A as we go, because sometimes when it comes to trauma specifically, it can be a lot of information and feel kind of overwhelming. And so I want for there to be a space for us to like clarify and build and learn together. And I am open to including and adding things and taking things in whatever direction the group is needing today. Luckily for you guys, I could like talk about trauma all day long. And so I've got an outline, but I'm very open-hearted to following wherever the group is needing support, information, resources today. So let's just jump in and talk a little bit about what is trauma. So Julie and I both come to this work from our own healing journeys. And when we talk about trauma, we can be talking about any event that happens, a crisis, something unexpected that happens. It can also just be the experience of living in a dysfunctional environment over a period of time. So we can talk about that, this event or thing outside of us that has happened. But we can also think of trauma as the response that happens inside of us because of what we've experienced. And today, for the purposes of our conversation, we're going to be talking about this internal response that we have, this internal experience of trauma, because the external things we don't have any control over. In most cases, they're in the past. They're not happening in this moment. But what we can address is what is inside of us happening. So let's talk about what does happen. When we are in our everyday, day-to-day life experiences, our brain is processing those experiences as it's happening, which is awesome. So I'm going to go to the grocery store and my brain is organizing, processing it, creating memories of it for me as I'm doing it. I don't have to think about it. That frontal, oh gosh, now I'm like on the spot and I can't remember. The prefrontal cortex is the part that is just taking care of that on autopilot for me. It's awesome. When I come home from the grocery store, other than remembering the things I forgot, I don't have to sit down and process that I went to the grocery store and like figure out how to deal with that experience, right? But when we have an experience that happens that shifts our brain from its everyday functioning mode into this shock or trauma mode, we are now taking in information and organizing it in a different way. So I'm going to use this little analogy. Pretend like my fist is a brain. I know it's like super sophisticated, but it's great because it's with us all the time. So these fingers are going to represent our executive functioning, that prefrontal cortex. And when everything is going according to plan, that's what we're leading with. There's a lot of energy in our brain, literal energy that is going toward that part of our brain. And that's the part of our brain that analyzes things, makes decisions, makes sense of the world, creates meaning out of things. So all of that is happening, right, as we're doing that. Now, when we get ourselves into one of these situations where we have an event that happens, now my thumb is going to represent our amygdala, and it's the fire alarm of our brain, okay? And so when that triggers, it puts our brain in a different functioning. And this is our limbic system. This is our emotional response center. But this amygdala is the thing that is determining, is this a crisis? Is this an emergency? Is it go time? This is a reflex. We're not cognitively making a decision. Yes, I'm going to be dramatic and make this a trauma. That's not what's happening. This is a reflex in our brain. It happens in less than a second. That transition happens. And so as we're making that transition, now we're functioning in a different way. Our brainstem right here is now a huge part of what's driving everything. We are in survival mode. This can be either, just a second, making sure everybody gets in. This can be either fight, flight, freeze, or appease. So this is just the way that our body's choosing. And once again, this is something that is not This is not something that we're choosing into. And I think that's so important for us to remember and understand. I'm not choosing to create trauma in my life. I'm not choosing to be dramatic. I'm not choosing to move forward in my life with triggers. This is a reflex that my body and my brain together, like how brilliant is our brain? It doesn't even need to wait for us to make a decision about it. It immediately goes into action to protect us and to help us get through that moment. So now we're here in this space, right? What's happening? We have a lot more sensation in our body that's happening. Things are being felt in a much more physical way because the energy is not being focused on my analytical. It's being focused down here in my limbic system and my brainstem. So what does that mean in a practical way? I am going to be feeling a lot more emotion potentially. It's going to be more intense. I'm going to be feeling a lot more sensations in my body. Maybe I'll feel tightness in my chest or numb and tingly. I might feel heaviness. I might get that sinking like pit in my stomach. I might feel nauseous. I might feel totally disconnected from my body or dizzy. Like any of these things can happen. Our bodies are all custom and different. And that's what shock feels like. That's what happens when our brain is shifting into that mode. And so I think of that as being the three parts of our trauma memory. We're going to have emotions, we're going to have sensations, and we're also going to have some thoughts and beliefs that are formed during this time, right? But these thoughts and beliefs, you guys, they are going to be not our best thoughts that we've ever had because all that energy isn't going to that analytical part of our brain. So they may not even make sense and they may not be accurate. But because it's connected to all of these very big feelings and emotions, they feel like very important thoughts and beliefs that we have to pay attention to. And this process works the same whether I'm standing in front of a classroom in third grade and I'm giving a presentation and I just peed my pants and the whole class is looking at me and here I am standing and my brain goes into this mode and I'm feeling all of this stuff. That's going to create a response in my body, right? But it's also the same if I'm hanging from a cliff by my fingernails. My brain is definitely going to be in emergency survival mode processing there. And so this idea of like small trauma, big trauma, like small T versus big T, there is some truth to kind of the amount of healing work that we will do, but the process in our body is really similar. Our brain doesn't really differentiate between that. It just shifts us into survival mode to help us get through that moment, whatever that moment is. So let's talk about questions about any thoughts or questions just about this piece, just to give you guys like a sneak peek of what's coming. We're going to talk about how do I recognize if I have a trauma response inside of me? What does that look like? And I'm going to share with you some of my personal things that I had noticed in me, and we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about how do I respond to a trigger? What do I do? I get triggered. What is the way to go, right? And what is included in processing trauma? What are my options if I realize, oh man, hey, there's me. I've got some triggers and I've got some trauma response in my body. So what next? So we're going to talk a little bit about that too, just so you kind of know like the direction that we're headed. But any thoughts or questions coming up from the group at any point, you guys can put them in the chat. All right, let's see. So Amanda says, you mentioned that a trauma response can come from being in a certain environment over time. Okay, perfect. That's such a great question. So one of the things that I want to let you know is kind of the difference there. When we have this in the moment experience where our amygdala triggers, that is what I'm going to refer to as a shock trauma. So that's going to create this like experience in our body of having that shift. And then an important piece that I forgot to mention is when that crisis is over, our body shifts back into our typical way of thinking, right? And so that is going to be our shock trauma experience. When we're in a dysfunctional environment over a long period of time, the trauma forms a little bit differently. So it's going to be a little bit different when we're thinking about, because there's not going to be there. So mixed in with our complex trauma is going to be these moments of shock that have come up, right? But also we are going to be complex trauma is less about a response that happens automatically in my body, and it's about a learned way that I learned how to show up in the world this way because it made things easier. I avoided conflict. I felt safer. I stayed safer. So when we're talking about a shock trauma response, we're talking about a response that we still have in our body that formed by reflex. And so we're going to process that. We'll talk about it toward the end, how we process it. When we're talking about complex trauma, which is, hey, I learned to read the room really well as a kid because reading the room kept me really safe. And I could like judge what people's moods and energy were and know when I could ask for something and when I couldn't. And I kind of developed this skill now. It's like an unconscious habit that I've developed that when I walk into a room, I'm scanning the environment, I'm reading the room, and I know kind of who's in a good mood, who's in a bad mood, where the energy's weird. And I'm doing all of that like subconsciously. So those are the kind of things that show up for us in complex trauma. And we address it like a little bit differently. And so we'll talk about that when we do the processing. What's the difference between generalized anxiety or a trauma response? So I would say that it can be a little bit tricky because we can have both. We can have one of my doctors for one of my kids was like, oh, I think that she's just hardwired for anxiety. And it made me laugh. Like genetically, basically, I'm saying genetically, we come from a long line of people who have anxiety. And so there's a little bit of hardwiring in there, right? But I will tell you from my personal experience and the experience of people that I have worked with that we can have kind of this baseline level of anxiety or depression or other kind of more physiological basis for these feelings that we're feeling. But it certainly doesn't help if we have compounded on top of that a trauma response. And so one of the things that I often encourage when people ask me this is get the support that you need for your anxiety. Like, let's not assume that that's trauma, right? Like, get the support that you need, talk with your doctor, let's learn some skills to do that. And let's process some trauma and use some curiosity to see what is going to happen as we begin giving you relief to some of these experiences. In many cases, there's a shift in how we're able to navigate the anxiety that we may have. And in some cases, it just disappears entirely. I mean, in like many cases, that anxiety really is part of our trauma response. So it kind of is like, it's like really individual.
I was just going to add something. I know I'm not going to talk, but I noticed too with children, sometimes it's a little easier because if they didn't come in with that anxiety, so if I'm with my child and my child is all of a sudden like super anxious, doesn't want to move forward, right? Like, did I know that that's like a trauma response, not just generalized anxiety, right? If she started the day with anxiety already, and I know that she generally has it, fine, but you can usually notice the upswing when an experience arises and the child is feeling anxiety that is linked to trauma. Sure. So just paying attention to that, even within ourselves. Like if I check in and go, whoa, an hour ago I wasn't feeling like this, and right now I am. What happened? What phone call did I have? What? Where am I? What am I experiencing? You know, like then for me, that kind of gives me a base of my generalized anxiety, or where my trauma's kicking in. So, sorry, I won't talk too much, I promise.
Oh, Julie, get out of 10. You can talk as much as you want to. What are you talking about? We love it when you talk.
My voice.
Okay, let me give you guys some like personal experiences from me. How do I recognize if I have a trauma response within myself? And this can be really helpful because I think that sometimes there's really clear triggers, right? I was in a car accident, and now whenever I'm not the driver, I feel like tense and stressed and I'm holding on to the side of the car, we're like, okay, well, I think I can guess where that might be coming from. Like that might be connected. So it feels really clear and obvious, but sometimes it's really camouflaged. And so sometimes I may have some of these thoughts, that's just the way I am. I'm just different than other people. I'm broken. We may have a desire to numb or distract or disconnect all the time as a way to not feel our bodies. People that have trauma response, it doesn't feel super cozy and comfy to be really mindful and present. When it's like I remember not being able to like my goal, like this sounds so exaggerated and I promise you it's not. My goal was I want to be able to sit on my couch for 5 minutes, not doing anything and not feel like I'm actually going to crawl out of my skin. Like I just want to be at home in my body. And that wasn't my experience. I really needed to be doing something, distracting myself all the time. And some of those things can come across as being good. Some of them we are very judgy about, but the truth is all of them are just helping us cope with this response in our body, right? So I'm going to share a couple of personal things with you guys. 4 different ways that my unprocessed trauma affected me. So it's almost 6 years ago now that I started processing my trauma experience. It was like the epic year of trauma processing. So I kind of think of it as like before trauma processing and after, how my life is, how my parenting is, my perspective on things. So I'm going to share with you some things that were like before that point. And I am turning 45 this summer. So I went a good part of my adult life with a lot of these responses, right? Number one, it affected my parenting. I noticed that I could feel rage, panic, fear in response to family members' situations that really didn't match what was happening. So I would feel way more fearful and needing to control things than the situation called for. I would feel really, really strong emotion, even though objectively I knew that the situation did not call for that level of a response. But it was as if my body was driving the response in that moment, and which came with a huge shame cycle. Because as soon as I would respond that way, there was a big part of me that would know this isn't okay. This isn't how I want to be a parent. This isn't even how I believe parents should respond. But because my body's driving the show, now, as soon as that response passes, now I'm feeling judgment and shame about myself, which kind of leads into this whole loop. Like once I had processed my trauma, I had a huge amount of trauma to process over just how much shame I was carrying for how I responded, because I didn't understand in that moment that that was my trauma response. And so I was judging myself instead of giving myself compassion. And it was just making things worse. So I'm like the poster child for like shaming yourself into better behavior does not work. I tried it for like 20 adult years. So if you want to save yourself a little bit, I'm just letting you know it does not work flat out. Compassion does. It really affected how I viewed myself. I felt a lot of despair often, even though I logically knew that I have good qualities and that I'm a good person and that people loved me. I really felt this sense that if people really knew who I was, they would not love me anymore. Like if they could really see the dark parts of me. I also started having more panic attacks. I developed this phobia about getting trapped or stuck somewhere. And it began to limit what I would do. I planned fewer trips. I was going into fewer unknown situations. And so my world was kind of getting smaller over time. And that was one of the things that made me kind of pull the trigger and say, okay, I've got to figure this out because I'm way too young to be like shutting down on life already, right? And then the interesting thing that I really had no idea was connected to this was that I had a lot of physical symptoms. I had migraines weekly. I had a lot of chronic muscle tension, definitely connected to the migraines, unexplained pain, including pelvic pain that, I told you guys I was a nurse. So I went to all the doctors, did all the tests, all the things. Nobody could explain why it was happening. It shouldn't have been happening. And so for 2 decades, I just lived with a lot of chronic pain. And so I'm going to tell you guys how those things are going in a little bit, but that's kind of like how it was showing up in my life. And that's just specific to Michelle, but it's kind of a way to see like, okay, if I tell you that most of my trauma came from childhood experiences of feeling unsafe, literally being physically assaulted and sexual abuse, you wouldn't necessarily think it would show up in that way. It's kind of camouflaged, right? In like how it was showing up. There's another way that we can identify, and I've kind of hinted at this, when there's a disconnect between how we want to show up and how we actually are showing up, then that can be a clue. What I know and understand to be true, but what my body is kind of pulling me to do, when those are out of sync, then we may have a thought or belief that's connected to some old stuff in there. It kind of can feel like an immovable internal resistance to shifting our behavior or our mindset. So let me give you an example. I used to be like the queen of control, the control freak, if you will. Really good at it, you guys. I was super good at trying to control everything. And so logically, I may recognize, I've learned, I'm smart, I read a lot, so I may know that I can't control outcomes. How sad is that, you guys? We want to. Like, we really want to control how things turn out. But like logically, I know that that's not true. But internally, I felt this fear of what would happen if I didn't try to control things, and this resistance and this drive to push me to continue to control things, worry about my kids, lead from a place of fear, even though intellectually I knew that that wasn't good, useful behavior, right? Another way, and this is kind of like a quick clue, when my response to a situation is bigger than what the situation calls for, or when it doesn't make sense. It's almost like there's a part of me that knows I'm being ridiculous, but I can't help it. That's what my response is, right? And this may come as like rage, panic, despair, hopelessness, like whatever it is. And that's a clue that what I'm feeling right now isn't just about this moment, it's about old stuff too. So that gives me a clue, right? That when my response, it's like the old saying, like, don't cry over spilled milk. Oh, let me tell you, when my kids were little, I did more than cry when milk was spilled a time or two, right? Like, it's ridiculous. And intellectually I knew that, but that didn't change the response that was coming up in my body. Okay, so as we shift into how do I respond to a trigger? Any questions coming up for you just hearing this, or any like aha moments or things that you want to put in the chat, feel free to do that.
I am going to add in that for me, as I listened to Michelle and how she responded to her triggers, I was not like I would laugh, I would make a joke. I was always like, how can I make everyone super happy? And you know, a lot of people would say like, well, what's wrong with being happy all the time? Well, the truth was, it was my coping mechanism. It's how I responded with trauma and everything. And so whether it's a narcissistic relationship or whatever it was, when I look back on all the things in my life, that's how I responded. That was me. And I had to figure out, I had a little identity crisis after I did my trauma work, because I was like, you kind of pendulum to the other way, which is like, well, now I have to be a jerk, or now I have to like stand my ground. And I realized that I didn't have to do that. Like, who I am, my nature is to be kind, right? And so, but to not be walked over anymore, and to realize that I literally, no matter how happy I am, I can't make someone else happy, and I can't fix their problem.
Man, that sucks.
Yeah. And it really sucks for me.
It like really sucks when you really, like when you actually believe that you can't make the people you love happy, and that it is not your responsibility to fix things for other people.
It's really hard.
Full stop. It is not. I've had so many people argue this point with me, and I'm going to tell you full stop, it's not your job to do that. But coming to that place of like accepting that, it's very challenging. And part of what Julie's talking about is like building like really healthy boundaries, it's actually a kindness in our relationships. It's helpful for the people that love us to understand what our needs are too, right? And so it can be really challenging. I think that's part of complex trauma, is not being able to have boundaries. Like, I just do whatever I need to do to keep the peace and keep things moving along. And if I don't do that, then I either feel this unsettled fear, or I just feel like a bad person because I'm supposed to make people happy. That's kind of my role. And maybe that's even why people love me. So who will I be if I'm not doing that, right?
Right.
Okay. I'm really curious what type of trauma effects come from a long history of being gaslighted. Yes. So I had that experience. There was a lot of gaslighting in my childhood. First and foremost, I think that we lose our ability to trust our own wisdom within our body. I think we lose the ability to tune into our intuition and to tune into those really good parts of ourselves, because we became, and as children, we really have no defense against it. Like, if the grown-up tells us we've got it wrong, like, who am I as an 8-year-old to say, no, I've got perfect clarity on that? Like, no, we just believe the people around us. And so for me, one of the bigger challenges to that was learning that it was not only okay, but it was actually this really beautiful skill to learn that the wisdom and the truth that's inside of me and that healing that's inside of me trumps someone else's viewpoint about something that's for me. And I think that is a challenging thing to, I think that comes later in our trauma processing. Once we've cleared more of our trauma response, we can dig into some of those pieces. But yeah, it's a huge part of what I feel passionate about when I'm working with my clients, is connecting you, like each one of you sitting here today. Some of you have like literally heard this in a class from me, but every single one of you, even the people that are listening to the recording, you count too. You have within you the ability to heal. You have wisdom in your body, and you have light and insight and intuition. And you may feel like, no, other people are like that, but I'm not. Like, other people are really good at that, but that's not me. But all that's happened is that you've had a lot of stuff happen that has put a lot of junk between you and your ability to connect to it. It's all there, right, for us to connect to. Can trauma be generational? Absolutely it can. There's a book called It Didn't Start With You that is really fun and interesting to read, to help you kind of see so many ways that these things are passed forward. She says, my mom would often tell us kids we needed to do whatever it takes to keep the peace. Now I realize she was teaching us from her trauma response. Oh, of course. And it's so helpful when we're processing that experience to realize, like, I didn't learn when I was a child that it was okay to tune into my inner wisdom and listen to that. But honestly, I get why I wasn't taught that, because my mom was never taught that. She was never given permission to do that either. And back, right? I actually made a generational family tree. It's like a trauma tree. And it was like as much trauma as I knew in my family line. And I was like, okay, so it kind of makes sense how we all got here, didn't it? And it doesn't make it okay that these things happened. And the goal isn't to justify anything. The goal is to understand our experience in our own body and to figure out the pathway to respond with compassion. I promise you it's available. Right now, it may not seem like it, but there is a path to see it with compassion. Okay, how do you help someone who has no ability to access their emotions? So the truth is that when we are like that, many times, I mean, obviously some people, you know, depending on if they're like on the spectrum or they have like some on the autism spectrum, for example, like that may be like an inherent limitation. But for many people, not feeling your emotions is a fantastic way to cope with having a lot of trauma response in your body, right? If I don't know what to do with all of this leftover stuff in my body, it's a brilliant strategy to just not feel it. It's a form of dissociation when we disconnect from it. I was like a rock star dissociator. I was able to dissociate like unbelievable. In fact, one time I was getting a massage and it was super painful, and I realized I've got a switch inside of my body where I can just like not feel it. And I was like, that's superpower. And then I cried because I was like, that's so sad that my body developed that response, that like I had a need to learn how to disconnect that completely from my body. And for me, I'll speak to my own experience, learning to feel safe in my body and learning to understand what these sensations and emotions were about gave me the courage to begin feeling what I was feeling, right? And that's really the first step. Like when you are that like disconnected, I think that the first step is realizing that it's possible to feel safe in your own body. And that seems wild because here I'm like living in my body every day. Like, what do you mean don't feel safe? But I genuinely, if I actually stop for that 5 minutes on the couch, I realize I don't feel safe in my body, which is why I don't stop for 5 minutes and feel it, right?
I think too, before you go on from that, because you said, how can I help someone? And the truth is like they have to come about it, but in conversation, a lot of times things will come up, and you can say, maybe like usually when I'm sharing my experience, they're like, yeah, I just don't have any trauma, or I don't feel anything. Even with clients, right? They'll say, well, what if I breathe and then there's nothing? I said, well, that nothing is something. And so, and then I'm able to bring up the conversation of disassociating or disconnecting, right? Because of trauma. And so, and then opening that conversation for them, because then you can allow all of that to, all of that knowledge and education then for them to receive on their end, and realize that, first of all, it's okay. It's okay if you want to stay in that. If you want to stay disconnected, I'm not telling you have to disconnect. I'm just telling you that there are ways to disconnect and to feel okay.
To connect
to your body, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
This one was skipped too,
yeah.
Just so you know.
I like super love to, like, as Julie was saying, that like feeling nothing, being numb is a feeling. And so we can acknowledge that there's a reason why we're feeling that and be curious about it. Okay. How do we start to heal trauma that we can't remember, like early childhood? So the beautiful thing about this, sometimes when people come to me, they're like, so how does this work? Do we go biggest to smallest? Do we go earliest, chronological? And the truth is, your body knows. Your body knows what it's holding that is no longer serving you. And so one of the first things that we do is we start building a connection and a relationship with your body. And we're going to listen to what your body tells us it's holding. And that's it. We don't have to process things your body's not holding a memory for. Awesome. If your body's not holding anything about it, great. There's like no work to be done there. But if your body's holding something about it, your body will share it. And the cool thing is, our bodies are so wise. Your body is going to share things in the order that it makes sense for them to be healed and processed, in a way that will feel safe, in a way that is going to build trust in the process. I remember the very first session I did, the event that I went to that like came to me, my body served up a nothing event. It was like very low risk, almost as if my body and my brain were like, if this bombs and doesn't work, it doesn't really matter because this isn't a big deal thing. You know what I mean? And so we just trust our body to know. And I would say, I don't know about you, Julie, but for me, it's like 50-50. About half my clients, the first thing they're like, I don't even know why I thought of this random thing. And it's not like a deep emotional thing, but it's like a thing, but it helps them to like see, feel, and understand the process. And isn't that a beautiful thing that our body like helps us to do this in a way that feels great to us, which is why like the way that we teach this, and I really think is like the most, I think it's the best way to honor our experiences, is that we are not telling you what you need to process. We are not guiding you like, oh, here's the event. I know you don't want to go there, but you have to talk about it today. That's not what happens at all. It's 100% you tuning into your body and sharing what's coming up for you and trusting the wisdom of your body to know that that's what's happening.
I've found too that I've had probably several clients actually, but it's interesting because they come in and they're like, I feel so nervous. I don't know why I'm so nervous. You know, like I don't even know what I'm going to be talking about. I just feel so nervous. And you know, the truth is that I like them to know that like everything's okay. Like there's nothing really to be nervous about. But after we do our breathing and we start in, it's interesting how they'll start into a happy memory, right? Like they're like, well, I'm not really thinking of anything negative. Like this is what has come to my mind. And they'll start to tell me about this beautiful experience that they had. But as they go into that experience, it's almost like they needed to feel like the shelter of joy and peace for a moment. Because as they go into the experience, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, like I remember now why I'm remembering this, right? Like not every trauma is all trauma, right? Like there's so many layers to it all. And it's just the way that we, that our psyche will allow us to go in and be vulnerable. So anyway, that's just experiences that I've had. But
Yeah, I love that. Okay, let's talk for a moment about.
someone like mentioned something that was really nice, changed for me.
I did read your comment, Juliana, and it made me feel like a warm, happy feeling inside of me. Okay, so let's talk about how do I respond to a trigger. So I'm going to give you guys some steps here. There's like 5 steps to this. Number 1, we're going to name it. Oh, there's a trigger. That's not just about this moment. Sometimes it can be called activation. I'm activated. This part of my body has become activated. And at first you may notice it later. You're like, oh, hey, what was happening 2 hours ago? That was a trigger. That wasn't just about that moment. Now I recognize it, right? And that's okay. We're not going to feel shame about when we recognize it. Remember, we can't shame ourselves into this. But we can notice what it is and name it. I'm feeling something that's not just about this moment. That's a great way to name it. There's some old stuff here. I wonder what that's about. We're going to step 2, resist shame. It's hard. We kind of feel like we deserve to feel shame when we have a big response, right? But if we can, we're going to resist shame. And which leads us to number 3, we're going to use curiosity to really get curious and explore, what is that about? That's so interesting. What were my thoughts in that moment? What was I believing about myself or other people? What did I think they were thinking about me? What did I think could happen in this moment? What does it mean that this situation was happening? Like, what did that mean to me in this moment? And just as I allow myself to get curious about it, then I can be like, oh, that's so interesting. I wonder when I started believing that. Like, I don't actually believe that real time, that that's true. But at some point, I started to believe that. That's so interesting. Okay, so to review, we've got name it, resist shame. Number 3, curiosity. Number 4 is self-compassion. My goal is not to make myself feel bad that I have a response in my body. That's not the goal. It's not the objective. I'm not here to be the judge and jury and convict myself of having a trauma response. My goal is to understand my experience in my body. I want to understand what I'm experiencing and what it's about. So figuring out a way to begin having compassion for myself. And I know that I'm acknowledging that there's a lot of internal resistance to these steps, right? But in some ways, sometimes we need permission to not beat ourselves up about it. Sometimes we need permission to be curious and have compassion with ourselves for having this response in our body. And then I kind of think, I don't know that this is a step, but for me, I guess the next step would be that this is a cue for me. This is my body giving me some information. My body's giving me a clue that I need relief, that I'm carrying something old that's not serving me anymore. And my body's like, hey, just in case you forgot, we're still holding this. And we just need you to know we're still holding it. So at your earliest convenience, can you help us get rid of it? Right? And really, how else is our body going to communicate that to us? And so I think of it now, I'm able to think of it as like when that comes up, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what that was all about. That was a big response for that. Let me put myself in timeout for a second and like soothe myself in a way that might feel great for me. I have the luxury of my kids being older, so I can do that more readily now. And this is my, and like, here is one path to self-compassion, one of like many. Thank you, body. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a cue or a clue that there's something that you're holding that you need relief from. I'm gonna help you. We're gonna figure it out. Okay. Questions about the next thing I'm going to talk about is processing trauma and some of the key components of it. And then I'll give you guys, because I know you're dying to know, the follow-up on how my trauma response stuff is going real time now. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we'll like definitely address it. Julie is being my eyes to like notice that. Okay, so congratulations, you have recognized that you have a trauma response. Yay! So what now? A lot of times, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to process that trauma response. And when I say process, part of what I mean is we're going to understand it. Part of processing it is understanding it. What is this? What is it about? What is it connected to? And now it's very empowering because I get to choose. Is this a response that I want to keep? Is it helping me? And that is part of the process too. And we're able to organize it and help our body understand, hey, friend, when you're feeling this sensation in your body, it's actually connected to this old thing. And thank you, body, for showing up for me in that moment. But great news, that's not what's happening anymore. You're not in that situation anymore, so we can release it and let it go. Obviously, there's a whole process to that, but that's kind of in a nutshell. And it's really just this understanding that we're developing internally that the moment of crisis has passed and we no longer need to hold this survival response. Because I have the best news ever, you guys. Your body can create a new shock response for a new situation like that. In less than the time it took for me to actually snap my fingers, your body can create a new response. So we may think that these old responses are keeping us safe, but it's really just adding clutter and getting in the way of us connecting to that inner wisdom. Because if something new comes up, we can create a new response immediately with everything that we need. And it's actually going to be a better response because it can be fully custom for the moment we're in, not cluttered with that old stuff coming into this moment as well, right? So it's kind of a clean slate. That being said, there are many paths to healing. I'm a big fan of following your curiosity when it comes to healing your trauma. People that have experienced complex trauma, which means they've spent some time in a dysfunctional environment, often find that there's more than one modality that's going to be great for them, which is part of this MindWell Collective that we've created, is recognizing that there's often more than one piece of the puzzle that we're going to need, right? But we're basically going to be mindfully connecting our mind and our body to the three parts of that trauma memory that came up. We use this pattern of guided validation and repetition, really coming from a place of compassionate non-judgment. Do you guys get the feeling that compassion is a big part of how we're going to heal and respond here? And from a place of safety. And what we like the goal is to help our body, our spirit, our mind, this full mind-body connection, to understand that the event is no longer happening, that this response is no longer needed, and that we can create space to view all the parts of myself with compassionate acceptance, audacious acceptance. We're going to put into the space that every part of who I am is worthy of compassion, belonging, and love. And so things that may resonate for you as you're looking for that resource would be a modality that helps you to make a mindful connection to your body. Somatic experiencing and processing is a huge part of it. Because remember when I told you your body goes into its shock response, there's a lot of sensation and emotion. So we have to process that physically in our body, not just intellectually. A lot of us, if there's complex trauma, particularly, we need some resourcing and relational healing, learning healthier ways to show up in relationship with others, sorting out, is it my job to make everybody happy? Is it my job to fix things for people around me? Or is it safe for me to focus on my own emotions and managing my own experiences and to give other people that same privilege?
So before you do your follow-up, I have this thought, and anyone who knows me knows when I have a thought, I have to share it. I was talking to someone the other day. They're going through a divorce and stuff, and one of the big complaints was that their son spends a lot of time on his computer or with video games or on video games, and it was like so bothersome to this parent. And I get it that like it's well overused, but in the moment, it just made me realize that like even for myself, right? Just like I've been really sick this last weekend, and I would find myself just on my phone, kind of doing my own thing because I want to check out, right? And so, just talking with that parent, I was like, when do you see your son like most into spending that time? And she kind of realized like, oh, when we're having these disagreements or something's happening like with my husband, my ex-husband and my son, that's where my son wants to go, is that he just wants to spend all of his time. So just in all of these things that we're talking about, right, as a parent or even for ourselves, it's always kind of easier to look at it like as to a child. For me, it's always easier to look at it to a child or my inner child. And I think that child can shut off their emotions, what's happening, right? Like you can see them right there in the moment coping, right? And so what would I do as a parent in that moment? Now that I know that, or I'm thinking about that, I might step into that room and just say, hey, I just want to check in. How are you feeling? What's going on? What are you thinking about? I'm not going to take you away from playing your game, and I'm not going to take the games away from you. But I realized, hey, I haven't checked in today. I just want to check in. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Right? For instance, my mom, who's on here last night, came to me and was like, how are you feeling? Someone who's recovering herself from a horrible accident with her leg. And it's almost like she knew, Julie's kind of checking out over here. The whole family's here. It's 4th of July. Everybody's having fun, and I'm checking out. But that's my coping mechanism, is to kind of just go and be in pain by myself, and not bring it on others. And so, her coming and just being like, you probably need some ibuprofen. You probably need this, right? And I did. But me, even this adult, right, who's been through trauma work, I still can see myself at times coping. And so paying attention to not only my own coping mechanisms, but as a mother, maybe to my children or my husband or my significant other, in any way. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that in.
Oh, I love that.
So.
And like other things that I just love, like adding to that scenario, like if we're like, oh, I'm just going to build on that too, like real time when I see that with people that I love and care about, I love adding these things that I know are true about them or about us. Like, I just want for you to know that I love you so much. And I see how wonderful and good you are. And I know that you're going to be okay. I know this is super stressful and what's going on feels really big. But I want for you to know, even with all this big stuff going on, you're going to be okay. I know that. And I am too. Yeah, it can be very soothing to kind of hear that when that feels really big for our kids. Okay, so follow up. So my parenting. So I have to tell you, this joy thing that Julie was talking about is for real. Like, what? I had no idea. That was like a hidden mystery to me for the first like 38 years of my life. Like, what is this joy thing that we're talking about? Now as a parent, now that I've cleared so much of my old response in my body, you guys, I can sit on the couch for 5 minutes It's amazing, right? And when things are going on with my kids, even if they're in distress, which anyone that's a parent knows that's the absolute worst time. If your kids are in distress, like that's the worst, right? But I'm able to really be in the moment with them and to respond from a calm and neutral place. And I have done very well in my recovery efforts not to control things, and it's not a white knuckle affair. I'm not like forcing myself not to control it. I genuinely don't have fear about it because I'm aware of the goodness of my kids and that they're going to be okay. My self-perception, I now recognize that all the parts of who I am are worthy of love and belonging. There's a couple of parts that's still something I have to remind myself about, but I genuinely believe that that's true. And I'm willing to try new things. I've been traveling more. I fundamentally see myself as capable and resilient. And perhaps the most like concrete thing is that after 20 years of daily pain, I no longer have migraines ever. I don't have that pelvic pain anymore, ever. I have occasional muscle pain because that's just, I think, the life of the world that we live in. I have to remind myself to decompress that. But really, the stuff that was so big that we were doing MRIs and tests all the time to figure out what it is, it just isn't there anymore. Now, does that mean everyone who has physical pain that will be completely gone if you process your trauma? No, that's just how it showed up for me in my in my body. I know we're coming up close to our time. Any other questions before I bring us into a little moment to kind of reflect and close us out today? Luckily, I remembered to record, you guys. How great are we about that? And so I'll be sending out the recording in case you missed anything or want to connect back up to it. So I just want to invite you to take a minute and reflect on what connected for you this hour. What did you notice about that intention that you set at the beginning of class? Is there an action that you feel moved to take? Is there a person that you want to connect with? Are you feeling inspired to test out being compassionate with yourself? What do you hope to remember from today? This can be just a personal reflection, or it can be something that you share in the chat. I love to read the things that you are there. Okay. Thank you for joining us today and trusting us with your time. Time is like one of our resources that I think is in the most demand from everybody. And so I recognize what an honor it is that you shared your time with me today. Next month, we're going to be joined by Chris Heap. If you've never had a chance to hear Chris teach, you're in for a treat. He is one of the most fun, dynamic, interesting speakers I've ever listened to. And he's going to be talking to us about the mysteries of happiness. Maybe like, what is this joy that you speak of? He's going to be talking about that. And so this concludes our time together at our July Learning Lunch. One of the things that I am even more convinced of now is that each one of us needs the other. And I have loved sharing this hour with you. So thanks, you guys.
Thank you.